Hello beautiful people, welcome back to the channel. Pots and Petals here, everything garden and allotment related. As you can tell by the sky, we've got a bit of a miserable day today. It's wet and it's soggy, but it isn't windy, which I'm thankful for. But I don't mind getting out in the rain. Gardening in the rain isn't a problem, so we're going to get some sowing and weeding done today. I found that the ground was quite dry previously to weed, so we should be able to get quite a few of them up. And I have bought a couple of conifers, and I'm going to give a go at bonsaiing them, so I'll bring you along for that as well. But yeah, just bits and bobs day today, and try not to get too wet if that's possible. But I thought I'd bring you guys along anyway for the ride. So come on, let's jump in and see what we can do. So you might have seen this with the conifers. So I got a little sarracenia when I went to the garden centre. So these are a bog plant and they're also carnivorous. So they eat tiny little flies. So I'm going to pop this along by the pond. I have seen a couple of other YouTubers stick these in the pond and I think they've survived over winter. I think they might have popped them in the polyhouse just over winter so they didn't freeze up. So we'll give that a go this year. I do need to find a little pot for it, but I've just stuck it down here just in the pond just for the meantime. I mean, it is raining, so it's not going to dry out anytime soon. One of the main reasons I've come down today is because I know we've got quite a bit of rainfall and I was a bit worried about the poly house roof. Now, as you can see, because I didn't build it on quite a good slope, a lot of this water is already starting to sit. So I did just want to come down and just get as much of that off as possible, just to stop it bowing even more. That is what these big planks are for, just to keep it up. But as you can see, it is really starting to puddle. So this one is probably the biggest one. So just to get some of that off the roof. There we go. That should see it through for the rest of the day at least. But this is where I've put some holes in the roof just to let some of the water through, and it does seem to water some of the polyhouse in here, just not much. I think these are ready to come home, a few of these, and this little guy up here, beautiful sun gold. For someone who only eats homegrown tomatoes, this is honestly an absolute dream. So for 8 months of the year I probably don't eat any fresh tomatoes, so when this time comes I'm a very happy lad. I've just noticed these tiny little chilies. I can't remember which ones these are. I grew Scotch bonnet and something else, but I don't think that doesn't look like a Scotch bonnet to me. So I'll go back, read up what it is, and I'll let you guys know. But we've got a few little flowers and a few little peppers. So we might be able to make some form of relish with those. These are the two plants that I've brought today, and we're going to give a go at bonsaiing them down. So on the left here, this is a yew, and I really like this because it's got some really beautiful branches that we're going to be able to mould into some really interesting shapes. And same with the trunk, we might be able to get a really nice curve on there. And this little guy down here, this is just a conifer, but it's got some really thin, tender branches that we're going to be able to twirl around and bend around to make some really interesting shapes as well. So I thought that would make a nice little bonsai plant as well. The little conifer was only a couple of quid and the yew was a £5, so I thought for £7 this little project isn't too bad at all. I've already got the pots, the gravel and the compost, so let's go. So before we get stuck in, let's just go through some of the tools that we'll need to complete the project. So a pair of sharp secateurs, make sure they're nice and clean and sharp. And we'll also need a pair of scissors just for some of those smaller bits that you might be able to rub off anyway. And we'll need a chopstick just to remove some of the dirt from around the root system so that you can see those nice aerial roots on top. And finally, just some wire so that we can make the branches and the trunk some really unusual shapes that will just make it that little bit more interesting. So as you can see, it is quite a young plant and it's still got quite a small root system on it. So I don't think I'm actually going to pot this up just yet. I'm going to keep it in this pot, but that doesn't mean that I want to get rid of some of the soil from the top layer, just so that we can see some of those aerial roots on there. So we're just going to use the chopstick and start to dig away some of that soil from on top. Now, this is a really soggy soil mixture, so I am just taking the top layer off as best as I can and as lightly as I can, trying not to damage the actual root system itself. By doing this, you're going to start to expose some of those main roots, and that's going to give it the effect of these aerial roots at the bottom of a really gnarled up old tree. So if that's the look that you're going for, really do try to get in there to remove some of that soil just to give it that real special look. Once we've got the roots looking how we want them to, it's now time to start removing the dead and dying branches from your tree, as it doesn't look very nice. And once this is removed, you can see what you're left with, and you can then really start to play about with how you want your tree to look. Now that we've cut all the dead away, you know what you're left with, and we now need to decide what we want the front of the tree to be. So I'm just having a little look around, playing around with the branches, just to see which way I want the front of the tree to be. And I quite like that main stem being on show and being able to see that, so I've decided that I want that to be the front. So we are going to get rid of some of these branches, as we can take off, I'd say 1/3 from the bottom. You don't really want any branches to make it look quite natural, so we're going to start by just taking them off. So in a moment, we're going to be using the wire to start bending these branches into the shapes that we want them to. So I'm just playing around with them at the moment just to see how we want them to be, and just taking away some of these lower stems just to make it look a little bit more natural and like a small tree. You wouldn't have leaves growing necessarily that close to the trunk. So I'm just having a play around and seeing how I want it to look. I also just want to take the tops off here, so I want to create some more branches and it to look a little bit more realistic. So the hope is to take these growing tips off, and this will produce a few more shoots and give it more branches and a little bit more structure in the tree itself, and I'll be able to train them eventually as well. So this is what it looks like after its first prune. I think what I'm going to do next is get the wire in, wire it up, get it into a nice shape, and then I can give it its final little prune. So I'm just going to have a tidy up, and then we can start wiring this little guy up. We're just going to use some standard garden wire for the next process. So as you can see, I've twisted it together just to make it that little bit thicker. Really, you want the wire to be 1/3 thickness of the branch for it to really work well. So we're just going to anchor the wire down into the root ball here, and then we're just going to start twisting that around each of these branches, and that will allow us to start to form them into some really unusual shapes. So we want to make sure that that wire is nicely anchored into that root ball, and we're now just going to wire each of these stems up, and then we can really start to play around with the different shapes and the unusual curves that we're going to be able to get in this little tree. And there we have it. I think I could have done with a little bit thicker wire just to pull down those branches a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with this kind of shape. Now I'm just going to go in and start remove some of those shoots from lower down on those branches, because you wouldn't necessarily see quite lush thick growth in those trees. So I just want to make it look as natural as possible and just remove some of those little stems. So that is the final shape that I've gone for. I've really tried to fan out those branches to look as natural as possible. Now a bonsai is never finished. You're always going to be pruning it, potting it, fertilizing it. So I will keep you guys updated with how this goes. This plant has got a really small root system on it still, so I'm not going to repot it just yet. I'm going to let it put on a little bit more growth before I even start thinking about cutting any of the roots off. But like I say, I'll bring you guys along with me as this starts to progress. The foxgloves seem to have germinated. They're the tiny little flecks on the left-hand side, so they start off as really tiny little seedlings. And on the right, we seem to have a few things germinated, but I'm not too sure whether they're primroses or not. I've never grown them before, so we'll give them another couple of weeks, and then we should be able to tell what is what. I'm really chuffed with how this little plant is looking. They haven't grown too much yet, which I don't expect. They're not really quick growing plants, but yeah, the alpines are starting to flower as well. That one, when I bought it, was really soggy, and I know alpines don't like soggy soil, so a lot of that is rotted, but I think there is some growth in there, so we'll keep it in and see how it goes. I like how this little planter blends in with the pond at the back really nicely. And hopefully those house leeks, or hens and chicks, will soon start spreading all over it and start dangling down here, which will give it a nice effect. We've got some really dainty little flowers on the alpines. So this is Louisa. Beautiful white little flowers on them. There is still some green growth. You can see just that little bit there, which I think is growing. So I am going to keep it in there, and hopefully it will bounce back. If you remember, this is where I sowed a load of carrots, but actually I can't see many carrots have germinated, so it might have been old seed. So I want to give this a good weed and get some more sown before it's a little bit too late, because August is probably the last time you can really be sowing your carrots. On the left here we have got some radish and some beetroot, and they've germinated really well actually. I just need to give that a little bit of a weed. And then on this side we've got some older carrots, so they need to come up, and then I will try and get 2 more rows of something in there, not too sure what just yet. And then as for these 2 beds, we have got some beetroot in here, and that's done really well, so just a weed needed in there. And then at the back here we've got some spring onions. Again, they have started to germinate, but I know that they don't like competition, so we really do need to give that a weed. This pear tree is absolutely covered with pears. Now these don't seem to ripen, they seem to stay quite hard for a long time, so I don't know whether you get eaten pears and dessert pears and these just need to be cooked. I'm not too sure, but this year seems to be an epic year for the pears. I swear I say this every video, but if you have any recipes for all of these pears, please let me know in the comments, because I'd love to know. So as you can hear and see, the heavens have opened and it's been raining like this all day. So I thought I would head home. It's meant to be a better day tomorrow, a little bit more sunshine. So I'll pop down, finish the yew, I will bonsai that down, and I'll also be able to get a few other jobs, including the weeding. So don't forget to pop back tomorrow, guys, and I'll see you all again very soon. So take care. Bye bye.